Good morning. This is Bill from Auto Europa Naples on a lovely Naples Tuesday morning. The good weather's coming back. It's nice and, low humidity outside, nice breeze. This is the season weather that we all crave. Very, very excited about that. And very, very excited about this. This is a 1964 Corvette Stingray Coupe. It's a fantastic vehicle. It's a second generation Corvette. This one is finished in a pretty rare color combo, desert tan inside and out with leather. Beautiful, beautiful car. And one of the most beautiful Corvettes, you know what, I'm going to say it. This is the most beautiful Corvette that has ever been made. Not this particular example, but the Mid-Year Corvettes, as they call them, the 1963 through the 1967 second generation Corvette. Gorgeous car, first Corvette to be designed in a wind tunnel, first Corvette to be put together from top to bottom by car enthusiasts, and we'll get into that as we go. The Corvette itself was invented by a guy named Harley Earl. He was the chief of design for General Motors, which was a bit of a stodgy conservative company back then, but he drove a Jag XK120, somewhere in California. He loved it. He said, you know what, we got to build something like this. And they came out with the idea for the Corvette, and they quickly cobbled a show car together for the '53 New York Motorama. Very, very quickly, body on frame. They threw in some parts they had hanging around, an old six-cylinder, and they made a beautiful, beautiful car out of this new, crazy high-tech stuff called fiberglass. But it was all hat and no boots. Underneath, it just didn't have what it should for a sports car. Enter a guy named Zora-Arkus-Duntov, a very interesting cat. He was born in Belgium to a family of mining engineers. Very weirdly, his mom divorced the original dad, Arkus, and then got another mining engineer to move in, Duntov, and they all lived together, which is a bit of a strange arrangement. And in fact, Zora took both their names as a sign of respect to both of them, which again, pretty liberal living arrangement back then. They ended up in Berlin. He ended up buying a motorcycle. He was zipping up all over around town. His parents hated that, so they tried to talk him into getting a car instead, which he did. He got a race car that had no front brakes. I'm sure they loved that. Drove that thing around the oval tracks of Europe for a while. Got into school, went to Berlin Polytechnic into engineering, so pretty smart cat. Joined the French Air Force. I guess they had all moved to Paris at some point. Married basically an exotic dancer named Elfie. And then the Nazis started coming along. He, flew for the Air Force for a while, these fighter jets. He smuggled gold in an old hollowed-out Mercedes. I mean, this is a very interesting guy. And, then the Nazis, convinced France to surrender. He got the hell out of Dodge. The way the story goes is his wife beat them to the border in her MG, barely, and he hid out in a bordello. I'm sure she loved that for a few days before they all made it to Spain and then came to the United States. He and his brother quickly formed a company that made cylinder heads for flathead Ford V8s that greatly improved them. And he had made it to that 1963 Motorama Auto Show where the Corvette was on display, and it blew him away. He thought it was one of the most beautiful things he'd ever seen, and quickly wrote a letter to GM saying, hey, you need to hire me, and I need to make this thing as great underneath as it is inside, as it is outside. And they did. They liked him, so they took him on as a staff engineer. And, he got to work improving the Corvette. And that is why he is known as the father of the Corvette, if not the inventor of the Corvette. But we'll get into that in a minute. So anyway, Duntov comes along, and he starts building a Corvette, starts improving the C1, which, put a V8 in it, beefed up the suspension, that sort of thing. But all all along, he wants to build a car that will truly compete with the stuff that Europe is creating. Europe is fresh out of the war, all the carnage, all the destruction, and they, are thrilled to be alive, and they get into motor racing. And, of course, that is a sport that equals the, the thrill and carnage and devastation of war in a lot of ways, but, maybe without some of the animosity. I'll tell that to, Ferrari and Jaguar. But anyway, Europe is running these things all over. Sports car racing starts to come to the United States, but it's not immediately picked up by the manufacturers until Duntov comes along. And when he gets to General Motors, he very quickly becomes the head of GM Performance and sort of lays the groundwork for all of the the GM performance stuff that we even have today, where you can go and get hot rod parts from General Motors for your car. He kind of pioneered all of that. And he, along with 3 other guys, came up with this car, this C2, and they built it from the ground up to be a sports car. And this is truly the car that brought Corvette the fame and fortune it deserved. They used a ladder-type frame. They used an independent rear suspension. They stiffened the hell out of the chassis by using more steel in the frame, but cut back on the thickness of the fiberglass. So it's actually a little bit smaller and lighter than the prior Corvette with a better weight ratio. They still use the V8s. They went on to use big blocks, and this thing is absolutely stunning. I think if we ever sent a spaceship off into the universe to, sort of advertise who we are, and we fill it up with stuff that celebrates, the beauty and spirit of mankind, because obviously we're going back to the 50s and 60s before, the national consciousness came all about having guilt. This is when we were still sort of celebrating humanity and not lamenting how horrible we are. And I would send off into space maybe, the works of Mozart. The Magic Flute is about as pretty a thing that's ever been put on paper. The works of Da Vinci or Mona Lisa, that sort of thing. And the Declaration of Independence, this beautiful document from the Founding Fathers that, guarantees the pursuit of happiness, in terms of, 1 horsepower per cubic inch and whatnot. And I would probably put in a Mid-Year Corvette because I think, again, it is inarguably just the best-looking Corvette that's ever been made. A first one designed in a wind tunnel. Top to bottom, this car is beautiful. Look at the split bumper up front, the slats behind it, the beautiful, sort of air induction look of the hood with the tube down the middle, the slats in the side, the knockoff wheels, the beautiful-looking rocker panels, that body line that runs the entire length of the car all the way around, the gorgeous bow tail, rear end with that wraparound rear window. It is a stunning, stunning vehicle to look at, and even better to drive. So getting into this particular model, I think when Harley Earl retired, a lot of guys sort of breathed this sigh of relief and said we can start taking the bling off these damn cars, because every car he made had chrome all over it. Again, they said he'd put chrome on a suit if he could. And you've got these 4 guys. You've got Duntov, you've got Bill Mitchell. He followed Earl as chief designer, and he was a great race car guy going back years and years. In fact, he worked for the Collier brothers, Miles, Baron Collier, the people who founded this little town that I'm in. And they were incredible race enthusiasts. They started a thing called they started Naples, but then they have a beautiful Collier Automotive Museum, which became the Revs Institute. And if you're a car guy and you haven't been to it, you need to. It is one of the most comprehensive and stunning, automotive museums in the world. There must be $1 billion worth of cars in that thing. But anyway, so Mitchell had some great influences and built race cars as time went on. You've got Larry Shinoda, a Japanese-American guy. He actually went through the internment camp thing and was a bit of an outlaw. He got kicked out of design school and worked briefly for Ford and some other companies before coming to GM and getting on the Corvette project. And he built some beautiful experimental cars. This one, by the way, is the XP720. That was its code name as it was being developed. And, that is the sort of underpinnings for this Mid-Year Corvette. But anyway, so what do you got? Shinoda, Duntov, Mitchell, all came together with some other players, of course, to create this sports car that Duntov said, finally, a Corvette that I can drive on the streets of Europe and be proud of, that's going to keep up with the Jags and the Ferraris and, the best sort of sports cars that Europe has to offer. The beautiful split chrome bumpers in the back. This one has the backup light. That was an option back then, so otherwise it would have had 4 red lights, but it has the 2 backups. They started making stuff functional on it, and I think that's again with Harley Earl going away. These vents on the 63s do nothing. They're just ornamental. The driver's side on the 64 has become functional. Later on they add functional vents on the fenders up front and other things, and I think that harkens to the race car guys. They just, they were the true people behind the car, and they want not more than you need, and everything to have a purpose, and that's what racing is about. Let's have a look under the hood. Pull the release there. Okay, so because of Duntov, Corvettes had V8s in them for some time. That was one of the things he started doing, and those V8s carried over into these first 2 years. This one is 327, 300 horse. I want to say 10.5 to 1 compression, but I'm sure someone's going to correct me on that. This does have the electronic ignition option, which is pretty cool and rare at the time to see, a car that didn't have a distributor. Very, very neat stuff. Also had a bigger 4-barrel carburetor to move it up to the 300 horse range. Now he's added a flex fan to this one to make it more amenable to the to make it a driver. Kept the original fan that had the thermostat on it. Also, while this was an original AC car, he did upgrade the compressor on it to make it a little bit colder. But other than that, and other than the Edelbrock intake, everything under here is pretty much as it came from GM. Again, this is the first Corvette to use an independent suspension. Up front, it used these double A arms with offset connecting rods between them, and a variable spring rate in this year, so it was a little bit easier on the hands and not as much banging as you're going over bumps. Very, very nice. The rear, it used a differential that got mounted to the frame of the car, and a couple of links to control lateral and forward movement, and a big leaf spring to control vertical movement. And in fact, that suspension was so good and so well designed that it ran all the way through 1982. Like that 78 anniversary car over there uses the identical frame and the suspension setup that this 64 does. That's how good the thing was that they designed, or maybe it's just how lazy GM was as they got into the 70s. But I don't think so. I think they just made a setup that was that nice. Oh boy. Push in my hood release so the thing actually closes. There we go. Okay, again, you can see the beautiful knockoff wheels on this car. Absolutely stunning. You can see the way that the door incurs into the roofline of the car. Now, this was done to make it easier to get in and out of, not just for big guys, but for guys wearing helmets, because, again, this car was all about racing. Unfortunately, in the late 50s, there were some incredibly high-profile, brutal racing accidents. One in, I want to say the Nürburgring, where 87 people were killed when a Mercedes went over a barrier, flew into the crowd, and took out a massive crowd of people. As a result, the big companies here in America overreacted again and pulled everything out of racing. No way are we gonna, have any race teams. So they all came back strong later on, but in the late 50s, early 60s, no way. No factory racing going on anywhere. In fact, I think there was an official agreement between the companies. So Duntov and Mitchell Dale and the other guys, they all wanted to keep racing. They built Corvettes for racing. They made a few Grand Sports and a Z06, and they all had to sort of do it on the sly. So you had to know which options to order when you went into your Chevy dealer, and if you checked off the right boxes, you'd come out with a race car, which is pretty neat stuff. Again, being, you know, power steering on this car, electronic ignition, power brakes, good options. Inside you've got leather, lovely, that was a nice option. This one has the automatic transmission, the Power Glide, and I know some people are going to say, you know, oh my God, it's like a, you know, Miata with an automatic. This is a car that shouldn't have it. Fair enough, but you know, if you have one Corvette or two Corvettes or five Corvettes, it's not a bad thing to necessarily have what could be called a cruiser. And if you're driving around the city grid streets like Naples, you know, in the heat, going stoplight to stoplight with a, you know, big heavy clutch on an old 4-speed can be a bit of a pain in the ass. Not necessarily a bad thing to put it in second gear, you know, these are 2-speed transmissions, and go for a nice drive. The Power Glide is also a drag racing tranny, even currently, you know, not in this form, but they do get heavily built up and are considered very fast and bulletproof for drag racing applications. You see the beautiful door panel. You start getting into artistic things like the way the door locks are designed to be reflectors, this sort of gorgeous little armrest pull handle. You know, the design of this car is so lovely, both in terms of what was drawn on paper and in terms of the accoutrements. You know, true to the style, it has this little thin wooden steering wheel, which is lovely. This uses a recirculating ball setup, which was considered quite sporty at the time. Not too many turns lock to lock, very responsive. They carried over this dual hump dash design. Let's go ahead and get in here from the earlier Corvettes, but they did make the glove box much bigger. They kept the gauges right in front of the driver where you'd want them to be. This guy, he, what the hell did he do? He put in these sort of stylish aftermarket gauges because he liked them. He took out the originals, but they're all still with the car. He just did it for fun. And, you know, to put the originals back in as a 1-hour sort of operation, not a big deal. Also, the radio, he kept the original, but put in this very true to form Bluetooth thing, so you could have some music in there. Let me fire it up for a minute and run the headlights, because it works better with that. See, that small block comes right to life. There's this little switch right here, and if I pull it back towards me, there you can see the headlights doing their thing. Very, very nice. One a little bit slower than the other. There's two controls for the headlights. You've got one to open them and one to turn the lights on, which is this guy here. This was the first GM car with Hideaway headlights since like a 46 LaSalle or something, or Buick, whatever the hell it was. And man, did they work nice on this car. And they loved the Hideaway headlight thing so much, they kept them all the way through, what was the last one, 2004. So that became a feature of Corvettes for many, many years. Anyway, very nice stuff on that, but let's turn those off and close them and keep the lines the way they were intended. They work a lot faster and smoother in that direction. Very, very nice. They kept this center tower. You get a clock over there, you get all your AC controls and your radio controls, and this radio is Bluetooth aftermarket. He saved the original again in a box, which is great, but this is a nice modern way to have good sound in this car without it, you know, harming the overall original appearance. Here's your original AC compressor cut off. Nice cold air in this car. When this guy bought it, he definitely wanted to drive it. So, you know, paid big money for it since it's in great condition, but then put another 20 grand into it in terms of, you know, making sure everything was safe. All new wheel bearings, new axles, new brakes, hoses, belts, upgraded the cooling system, upgraded the air conditioning, and made it a fantastic driver. And in fact, I think the automatic transmission is very, very helpful to that end. If you just want to drive the car, that's a nice way to do it. Nice that it's a gated shifter as well, very much like the old Mercedes. You know, the fit and finish of this car is terrific. You can tell this was from a very good era of General Motors, you know, when they had terrific quality control, very happy employees, and were turning out just beautifully well-made cars. I'll go this way to avoid the sun. What stuns me about this car is what a good driver it is. You know, it tracks nice and smooth. There's no vibration in the wheel. There's no, you know, no negative feelings at all. It just sort of, you know, feels like something you could effortlessly spin around to, you know, Whole Foods and pick up some fried chicken. It just is a lovely, lovely driver. And of course, that's, you know, in large part due to the money that this guy spent in order to make it just that. Very nice guy there. Power steering, nice option in the car. Even though they did lighten the front end quite a lot on these C2s to make the steering effort not nearly as annoying as it was on the earlier cars. You can feel low and well slung. I mean, this again, you sit lower in this car than you did in the C1s. The frame comes up, you know, where your hips are. So you're really just part of the machine. And the power to weight ratio is terrific. It's a light car, thanks to advancement in engineering at the time. Getting into the secondaries. I mean, what fun. I love the way the fender hubs are, you know, sort of coming up in a sinister manner on the left and the right. I love the V8 sound, the induction sound, the secondary sound. Listen to that when the throttle opens, the 4-barrel. Man, what a lovely, lovely feeling. And the way this car drives. And of course, that holds true. You know, the people who came out of the C1s and got in the C2s were blown away. And again, that's because those 4 guys and all their, you know, the other ancillary cats were true race car drivers. You know, Duntov had won Le Mans in a 550 Spider for 2 years. I mean, these guys knew their race cars and wanted to build a street car that paid homage to that and could really take it to the Europeans, the star-spangled sports car, if you will. And they did it. They pulled it off, and this C2 was it. And, you know, I think that's why it's just going to go down as one of the most beautiful, attractive, purpose-built sports cars of all time that really just did this country proud, you know. Immigrants even coming together, you know, to live the American dream. I mean, it's a little bit kitschy, but goddamn is it true. I mean, you've got, you know, a guy who evaded you know, the Nazis in World War II to come to America. You've got another guy who was in an internment camp, and you know, somehow they all end up in Detroit and put together one of the most beautiful, and not just cosmetically, engineering-wise, inside out, ground up, from the bottom of the tires to the top of the roof, one of the most beautifully styled, you know, performance cars in history, and an absolute American icon. So there it is. You know, this one's for sale. If you have an interest in it, you can go to our website at aenaples.com. Give us a call, 239-298-8000. I'm so happy to have it. What a beautiful piece to have around. I just parked it inside near my office. I got a little garage where I can pull a car in and see it from my desk. And I just have it sitting there and looking at it. And, you know, when I feel miserable and want to kill someone like the detailer, I get to look over at the Corvette, and it soothes me the way a Valium might. So just absolutely fantastic to have around. Thank you very much for having a look. We appreciate it. And we'll see you with the next one. Take care.